You're fired. Effective immediately. Brandon Whitmore's words cut through the air in the meeting room like a cold blade. He didn't even blink as he said them, his arrogant smile shining brighter than the gold Rolex on his wrist. Around the table, no one dared look me in the eye. 8 years building the technological backbone of this company. Erased because I missed a party. I left there numb, carrying the silence like armor. Not knowing that spark had just ignited everything. Hours earlier, I was in my office, staring at an email that seemed harmless enough. Attendance mandatory. Brandon's birthday party. Mandatory attendance for a birthday party. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, but I didn't reply. I didn't have time for champagne toasts and empty speeches that night. Not when the final line of code for a security algorithm worth nearly $1 billion was flashing on my screen like a heartbeat on a monitor. My name is Nate Sullivan, Chief Systems Architect. The guy they called the human firewall for 8 years. I gave everything to this company. Sleepless nights, weekends buried in server rooms, fixing vulnerabilities before anyone even knew they existed. While others played politics, I built the shield that held our empire together. Brandon Whitmore, on the other hand, built nothing. He's the CEO's golden boy, parachuted straight into a vice president position with a resume thinner than the napkin his job offer was probably written on. Charming, spoiled, and obsessed with control, people whispered that he had a short fuse and a long memory for anyone who crossed him. My phone vibrated against the table, pulling me out of my thoughts. A missed call from my mother. A text followed. "Honey, will you be able to make it to dinner tonight?" My chest tightened. She had been in and out of the hospital for weeks. I typed back quickly. "Tomorrow. I just need to finish this update." It wasn't a lie. This update wasn't just important. It was critical. The algorithm I designed wasn't a product. It was the backbone of our global safety net. If I didn't get this patch out tonight, the next board meeting could turn into a bloodbath. Another notification slid across my screen. A Slack message from a colleague. "I hear Brandon hates it when people miss his parties. Says it's a test of loyalty." I smiled bitterly. Loyalty test. I was loyal to my job, not to wine. I started typing a reply when another ping came in like a warning shot. He was joking. Or maybe not. "Watch out, Nate." I glanced at the clock. 9:40 p.m. I went back to my code. The party would come and go. But this system, this was everything. What I didn't know then was that an unanswered invitation would cost me everything in the morning. At 9:15, I walked straight into an ambush. The executive meeting room was colder than usual, its glass walls reflecting a skyline that suddenly seemed strange to me. Brandon Whitmore stood in the center as if he owned the building, his navy suit cut with precision enough to slice the air, a smile playing on his lips. Behind him, sitting with her arms crossed, his mother, the CEO, her face carved in stone. Not a gesture or word came from her. "Nate," Brandon said, rolling my name slowly like a taste he didn't approve of. "Thanks for coming on such short notice." I placed my hands on the back of a chair, waiting for context. Instead, Brandon straightened his tie, his eyes shining with something that wasn't professionalism. It was triumph. "As of this morning," he began, his voice firm and cruelly calm, "your employment is terminated. Effective immediately." For a split second, the words didn't register. Fired. My mind scrambled for reasons. Budget cuts, restructuring, a project that went wrong. But he kept talking. Each syllable cutting into me like paper cuts. "You've shown a lack of commitment," Brandon continued. "Missing last night's event. Not a good look for someone in your position. We need team players, people who fit into our culture." My throat burned, but I didn't speak. Around us, the silence swelled until it pressed against my ribs. Culture. I carried this company on my back for 8 years. I built the algorithm that kept their entire global network from collapsing. I had been the firewall, the anchor, the last line of defense. And now I was being written off by someone whose greatest achievement was throwing his own birthday party. If you're enjoying this story of how nepotism almost destroyed a tech genius, don't forget to subscribe to the channel because you won't believe what happens when he discovers he has an ace up his sleeve that no one suspected. But what Brandon didn't know was that getting fired wasn't the end for me. It was just the first move in a chess game I'd been planning for months without even realizing it. I swallowed the heat rising in my chest and smiled slightly, even though the room was spinning beneath my feet. But inside, panic was coiling tightly. My mother's health insurance depended on my job. The last hospital bill had drained almost all my savings. Without coverage, every treatment would suck me dry. Brandon must have seen the flash in my eyes because his smile deepened. He leaned forward, resting both hands on the polished table, and delivered the sentence that would be etched in my memory forever. "Never," he said softly, "think that you are more important than my family." It wasn't a warning. It was a statement, a reminder that this wasn't about merit or contribution. It was about bloodline. And I didn't share his. I gathered my things without a word. The chair legs scraped softly against the floor, an ugly sound in the perfect silence. Brandon didn't take his eyes off me. Even when I reached the door, his smile remained sharp as broken glass. And when I stepped out into the hallway, a thought exploded behind my eyes. "You just made the price of loyalty unbearable, Declan. And you're going to pay every penny." The envelope waited for me like a silent execution order. It lay in the middle of my desk, cream-colored, the company logo embossed, my name typed in bold. Next to it, my monitor displayed a cold white screen with a cold sentence in black. "Your access has been revoked." 8 years of building the strongest security system in the industry. Erased with a single line of text. Around me, the office buzzed with forced normality. Keyboards clattered, phones rang, but every pair of eyes refused to meet mine. People who had once praised me for saving multimillion-dollar contracts suddenly found the floor fascinating. Loyalty, I thought bitterly, was a currency that devalued overnight. I slowly opened the envelope. Termination agreement. 2 pages. No thanks. No acknowledgement of the billion-dollar architecture I had designed. Just legal jargon and a final instruction: return your badge by the end of the day. My fingers tightened around the paper, the edge cutting into my skin. But I didn't let my hands shake. Inside, the fire roared. Every sleepless night. Every holiday spent fixing bugs. Every moment I sacrificed with my mother. They reduced all of that to this envelope. I wanted to scream, march back into that conference room, and throw the document in Brandon's smug face. But I didn't. Explosions don't win wars. Silence wins. Brandon Whitmore wasn't just the CEO's golden boy. He was a product of the culture of privilege that infected every floor of this building. At 28, he'd never worked a real day in his life. With a business degree from a private college where his dad made a generous donation, he was parachuted straight into the vice president's office without ever stepping foot in a trench. While I burned the midnight oil debugging critical code, Brandon was at networking parties, racking up contacts like playing cards. While I saved the company from cyber attacks that could have cost millions, he was posting photos on Instagram of executive lunches at 5-star restaurants. To him, leadership was about who you knew, not what you knew. But what really burned me was the casual arrogance with which he treated people as disposable. Last week, he fired 3 interns because one of them didn't say good morning when he walked down the hall. The month before, he transferred a senior analyst to the night shift because she questioned one of his decisions during a meeting. Brandon didn't command through respect or competence. He ruled through fear and whim. And now I was his latest victim. The difference was that, unlike the others, I wasn't going to take it lying down. I packed slowly, each click of the keyboard echoing in my skull like a countdown. My co-workers whispered when they thought I couldn't hear them. What happened? She didn't go to the party. A laugh somewhere behind me. I breathed through my teeth and kept my eyes on the table. The screen flashed again. This time it wasn't hers. A text slid across the corner of my phone. Unknown number. 5 words. Leave the building. Cafe 27. And then a name that stopped my breath. Jonas Chun. For a moment, the noise of the office turned to static. Jonas, former CFO, architect of all major acquisitions, the man who knew where the company buried its secrets. A year ago, he disappeared after a quiet retirement. No farewell speech, no LinkedIn update. He was simply gone. My pulse pounded in my ears as I slid my phone into my bag. I didn't hesitate. Badge in hand, envelope under my arm, I left without a word. The elevator doors closed, sealing the whispers behind me. If Jonas Chun was contacting me now, it meant one thing. My story wasn't over. It was about to turn into something no Whitmore could have predicted. What Brandon didn't know was that this humiliating dismissal wasn't my professional death sentence. It was the first move in a game I didn't even know I'd been playing for months. And by the time he figured out the real rules, it would be too late to change the score. The bell above the cafe door jingled as I entered, still clutching the envelope like evidence of a crime. Cafe 27 was nearly empty except for a man in a charcoal coat sitting in the far corner. His silver hair caught the morning light streaming through the window, and when he looked up, his eyes were as sharp as I remembered. Jonas Chun hadn't aged so much as hardened. "Nate," he said, rising just enough to pull out the chair in front of him. "Sit down." I sank into the seat, my heart pounding against my ribs. Jonas Chun, the man who once signed billion-dollar contracts without breaking a sweat, who disappeared overnight with whispers of a fight no one could confirm. And now here he was, staring at me as if he'd been waiting for this moment his whole life. "You're wondering why I called," he said, his voice even, deliberate. I nodded because words seemed too fragile. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Before I left that building a year ago, I set something in motion for you." My breath caught. "For me?" Jonas smiled slightly, like a man savoring the joke. "When you started building that algorithm, I knew your value. And I knew the people in charge wouldn't protect you if the politics got ugly. So we built a safety net." I stared at him, waiting for the catch. "A trust fund," he continued, "which owns an LLC, Sullivan Innovations. 6 months ago, you signed some papers discreetly, remember? Buried in the compliance pile I gave you to review." I searched my memory, and then it hit me. That pile of legal documents Jonas had insisted I review late one night. I thought it was routine intellectual property protection. "If you left voluntarily, nothing would change," Jonas said. That stack of legal documents Jonas insisted I review late one night. I thought it was routine intellectual property protection. "If you left voluntarily, nothing would change," Jonas said. "But if you were removed without cause, the LLC assumes full ownership of your work. And guess what? Brandon just activated it." The room tilted. My throat went dry. "You're saying that?" Jonas reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a small silver flash drive, and slid it across the table. The metal gleamed like a loaded gun. "Your system, your patents, your licensing keys," he said. "Everything belongs to you. As of this moment, the company just shot itself in the foot." I closed my fingers around the drive, its weight electrifying my palm. Jonas leaned back, his eyes shining. "Brandon thought he humiliated you. The truth is, he just activated the clause we've kept buried for half a year." For the first time since this nightmare began, something inside me flashed back to life. It wasn't anger anymore. It was hope. Sharp, dangerous hope. But what Jonas had planted was only the seed. Brandon, in his infinite arrogance, was watering the garden of my revenge with every cruel move he made. And he was just getting started. 2 hours after leaving the cafe, my phone exploded with notifications. Text messages, emails, missed calls from panicked colleagues. The algorithm had crashed. All security updates had stopped. The system that had protected the company from cyber attacks for years now displayed a simple message: license expired. Contact Sullivan Innovations for renewal. Meanwhile, Brandon was giving interviews to the financial press, explaining how strategic restructuring would make the company more efficient. His arrogance was so thick he didn't realize he just handed me the biggest leverage I could have asked for. Every confident word he said to the journalists only dug the hole he was about to jump into deeper. My phone rang. It was my mother. "Honey, I just got a call from the hospital. They said my insurance was canceled." My jaw clenched. Heat rose up my neck. "Mom, leave it to me. I'll take care of it." But when I hung up, my hands were shaking with pure rage. Brandon hadn't been content to humiliate me professionally. He had attacked my family. It was at that moment that I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't just going to get my job back or find another job. I was going to teach Brandon Whitmore and his family the true price of arrogance. I was going to show them that underestimating someone with my technical knowledge and thirst for justice was the most expensive mistake they could ever make. Marcus Rivera, my former teammate, called me the next afternoon. His voice was tense, almost whispering. "Nate, man, They're going crazy up here. The entire system is down. Brandon is yelling at everyone, blaming the IT team for incompetence. He has no idea that you have the keys now. I smiled for the first time in days. Marcus, do you trust me? With my life, man. You've saved my ass more times than I can count. Then keep your eyes and ears open. And when the storm comes, and she will come, make sure you're on the right side. There was a pause. Nate, you're planning something, aren't you? I'm planning justice, I replied. And it's going to be beautifully devastating. Rachel Kim, from the internal audit team, found me at a coffee shop near my apartment the next day. She looked nervous, checking over her shoulder as if she were being followed. Nate, I need to tell you something. For months, I've been documenting irregularities in Brandon's budget approvals. My pulse quickened. What kind of irregularities? Overpriced contracts for consulting firms that barely exist. Travel expense approvals for conferences that never happened. And there's more. She slid a thin folder across the table. He's diverting funds from the research and development project. Millions, Nate. And I think your mother found out. My blood ran cold. What do you mean? The CEO asked me to do a full audit last week. Right around the time you got fired. Too much of a coincidence. The pieces began to fit together in my mind like a sinister puzzle. Brandon didn't fire me just because of his wounded ego. He fired me because he needed a scapegoat, someone to blame when the numbers didn't add up. That night, sitting in my empty apartment, I opened my laptop and started typing. Not a plan for revenge, but something much more powerful, a forensic case study of how incompetence and corruption could destroy a billion-dollar company. Each keystroke was a silent declaration of war. What Brandon didn't know was that by pushing me out of the spotlight, he had given me something infinitely more valuable than any corporate title: operational invisibility. While he struggled to keep up appearances on the main stage, I moved freely behind the scenes, gathering allies, evidence, and most importantly, building a strategy that would destroy not only his career, but the entire system of privilege that sustained him. For the first time in years, I felt completely in control. Brandon had declared war on the wrong person, at the wrong time, using the wrong tactics. And by the time he realized it, by the time he finally understood that he had turned a dedicated employee into a relentless adversary, it would be too late to back down. But that was just the reconnaissance phase. The heavy artillery was being positioned, and when I finally pulled the trigger, the damage would be so complete and irreversible that the very definition of power in the company would be rewritten forever. The cursor flashed on the screen like a heartbeat as I typed the most important email of my career. Recipient: Helix Dynamics Executive Board, our biggest competitor. Subject: exclusive licensing opportunity, Sullivan Innovations. 3 days had passed since the system crashed completely, and Brandon still had no idea that I held the keys. The response came in less than 2 hours. Meeting scheduled for Friday. Helix CEO Michael Chun, Jonas's brother, wanted to discuss in person a partnership that could be worth hundreds of millions. Meanwhile, on the 20th floor of the building I used to call home, Brandon was in a state of total panic, yelling at technicians who couldn't solve a problem only I knew how to fix. Marcus called me that afternoon, his voice tense as a violin string about to snap. Man, you need to see this. Brandon called an emergency meeting with the entire board. He's blaming the IT department for technical incompetence. He fired 3 people today, including Sarah from support. My jaw clenched. Sarah had 2 young daughters and an unemployed husband. Did he say anything else? I asked, keeping my voice under control. That he's bringing in outside consultants to fix the mess you guys made. He's paying $500,000 to a Boston cybersecurity firm. Money that could save 10 people's jobs. $500,000 to fix a problem that didn't exist. To try to hack a system I designed myself. The irony was delicious, but the cruelty to innocent employees ignited something dangerous in my chest. Rachel Kim met me in the underground parking lot of a shopping mall on Thursday night. She seemed more nervous than before, constantly checking over her shoulder as if she expected to be followed. Nate, things are getting ugly up there. Brandon is paranoid. He hired a private investigation firm to dig into your life. My blood ran cold. What are they looking for? Anything they can use against you. Financial history, personal relationships, even your college medical records. She slid a thin envelope across the table. But I got this before it reached his hands. Copies of all the fraudulent contracts I documented. Dates, amounts, shell companies. Everything. I opened the envelope and my eyes widened. These weren't just a few irregularities. It was a systematic scheme of corruption that had been going on for 3 years. Brandon had embezzled over $15 million in company funds through fake contracts, non-existent trips, and imaginary consulting gigs. Money that should have gone to research, development, and salaries. Rachel, do you realize what this means? She nodded grimly. That he didn't fire you because of a party. He fired you because he was planning to use you as a scapegoat when the audit uncovered the embezzlement. The pieces fell into place in my mind like a macabre puzzle. The sudden dismissal, the blame placed on the IT department, the hiring of expensive consultants to fix non-existent problems. Brandon wasn't just protecting his ego. He was protecting $15 million in stolen money. That night, sitting in my apartment with 3 monitors lit up, I began to build my case. Not just to get my job back or get severance pay. To expose the entire network of corruption that infected the company from the inside out. Every document Rachel provided was verified, cross-referenced with public records and internal emails I still had access to through loyal contacts. What I discovered was even worse than I had imagined. Brandon wasn't working alone. His mother, the CEO, knew everything. Not only did she know, she actively participated, signing off on contracts she knew were fraudulent. The company wasn't just run by nepotism. It was a family money laundering scheme disguised as a legitimate corporation. Jonas called me on Friday morning, his voice carrying an energy I hadn't heard in years. Nate, the pieces are moving faster than we expected. Michael wants to close the deal today. $500 million for the exclusive license to your algorithm for 5 years. $500 million. More money than Brandon and his mother had stolen in a decade. There's more, Jonas continued. Michael has contacts in the Department of Justice. When we show them the documentation you've collected, they'll want to investigate not just corruption, but money laundering and tax fraud. My breathing quickened. This wasn't about personal revenge anymore. It was about systemic justice. Meanwhile, Brandon was making his own desperate move. Marcus sent me a photo of the company hallways, posters with my picture and the word "wanted" in red letters. $100,000 reward for information leading to the location of Nate Sullivan and recovery of stolen intellectual property. Stolen intellectual property. The man who had literally stolen $15 million from his own company was accusing me of theft. The audacity was impressive, but also desperate. It was the move of someone who knew he was losing and needed a miracle. If you've been following this story of how a tech genius turned an unfair dismissal into the biggest corporate turnaround ever seen, be sure to subscribe to the channel because what happens next will completely redefine the concept of intelligent revenge. Friday arrived like a dawn after a storm. I dressed with the same care as a gladiator preparing his armor. A navy blue suit, the same color Brandon wore in his arrogant presentations. Not by coincidence. Today, I would wear the uniform of victory. At the Helix Dynamics office, Michael Chen greeted me with a firm handshake and a smile that carried decades of experience in high-stakes business. Nate, what you've built is revolutionary. Not just a security system, but a new philosophy of digital protection. We spent 3 hours refining the terms of the contract, each clause a stake driven into the heart of the Whitmore empire. At 4 p.m, I signed the agreement. $500 million, paid in 2 installments. The first, $250 million, would be transferred immediately. The second, when the system was fully integrated into Helix's infrastructure in 6 months. More important than the money was the exclusivity clause. No other company could use my algorithm without explicit permission, including the company that fired me. I walked to the parking lot with the signed contract in my leather briefcase, feeling the weight of a victory that had not yet been fully revealed. My phone vibrated with a message from Marcus. Brandon just held a press conference. He said the company is suing you for industrial sabotage and will recover his property at any cost. I smiled for the first time in weeks. Brandon had just made the fatal mistake. He had made our dispute public. Now it wasn't just a corporate legal matter. It would be a media spectacle where every move would be scrutinized, every claim verified, every lie exposed under the relentless spotlight of public opinion. That night, I prepared my final counterattack. It wouldn't be a lawsuit or a backroom negotiation. It would be a full disclosure, broadcast live, where I would not only prove my innocence, but expose the entire web of corruption that Brandon and his mother had built. They wanted a public war? Then they would get a war. But it would be on my terms, with my rules, using weapons they never knew I possessed. The point of no return had been reached. Tomorrow, there would be no more Nate Sullivan, the wronged employee. There would only be the architect of one of the greatest turnarounds in American corporate history. The first bomb exploded at 6 o'clock on Monday morning. Not literally, but the effect was devastating. The Washington Tech Tribune published a cover story with a headline I had dreamed of reading: Corrupt Executive Embezzles $15 million while firing billion-dollar system creator. The photo showed Brandon leaving an expensive restaurant, champagne in hand, next to the headline about the fraudulent contracts. My phone rang before I could finish reading the first paragraph. It was Marcus, his voice shaking with excitement and fear. "Man, you have to see this. The whole building is in a panic. There are FBI agents in the lobby. The SEC is here with a search warrant. And Brandon," he paused, swallowing hard. "Brandon is locked in his office yelling at lawyers." I smiled, taking a sip of my breakfast coffee. Coffee brewed in my new kitchen, in the apartment I could afford with my first paycheck from Helix Dynamics. "How's the IT team?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Confused, but relieved. "Sarah came back this morning with a promotion and an official apology from management. Apparently, someone leaked that you're innocent of any sabotage." Someone. I smiled wider. Rachel Kim had worked all night with the journalists, providing impeccable documentation of every fraudulent transaction, every phantom contract, every penny embezzled. But that was only the first move. The second was already in motion. At 9 in the morning, Helix Dynamics officially announced the acquisition of the rights to the Sullivan algorithm for $500 million, with an option to expand to $1 billion in 3 years. The news ricocheted through the financial markets like an earthquake. Whitmore's stock plummeted 23% in 2 hours. Not just because they lost the security system that backed $500 million in contracts, but because investors finally understood that the company was run by incompetents and thieves. Meanwhile, I was in the Helix office, signing a consulting contract that would make me director of innovation with a salary of $2 million a year. Michael Chun greeted me with the most satisfying handshake of my life. "Nate, welcome to the future of digital security. Your algorithm isn't just revolutionary, it's proof that true talent always finds its place." But the real satisfaction came when my phone vibrated with a message from Brandon. "We need to talk. Urgent." I didn't respond immediately. I let him sweat for 2 hours before sending him an address, the same cafe where Jonas had revealed to me that I controlled my own destiny. At 3 in the afternoon, Brandon arrived at Cafe 27, looking like a man who had aged 10 years in a week. His impeccable suit was wrinkled, his hair was unkempt, and his eyes were red from someone who hadn't slept in days. He sat down heavily in the chair across from me, without the arrogant smile that defined his personality. "Nate," his voice was hoarse, desperate. "We need to work this out. Maybe we can work something out." I took a sip of my coffee, savoring the moment. "What kind of deal, Brandon?" He leaned forward, his hands shaking slightly. "You come back as director of technology. 50% raise. Profit sharing. We forget all about this." The audacity was impressive. He still thought he could control the situation, that his money and position could buy him a way out. "What about the $15 million you stole?" I asked calmly. His face paled. Those are baseless allegations. You can't prove it." I interrupted him, sliding a folder across the table. 47 fraudulent transactions. 16 shell companies. 23 trips to conferences that never existed. As he opened the folder with trembling fingers, I continued. "Every document has been authenticated by independent auditors. Every transaction traced through 3 different jurisdictions. Your digital signature is on every one of them, Brandon." His face drained from white to a sickly green as he leafed through the evidence. "How did you get all this?" "Rachel Kim has been documenting your activities for over a year," I replied. "She knew she would eventually need protection from your retaliation. When you fired me, it only sped up the timeline. Silence stretched between us like an abyss. Brandon closed the folder slowly, finally understanding the magnitude of what he was facing. You orchestrated all of this from the beginning. No, I corrected. You orchestrated your own downfall. I just documented every step. That's when my phone rang. The call I had been waiting for. Excuse me, I said, answering. Nate Sullivan. Mr. Sullivan, this is Special Agent Martinez with the FBI. We're ready to proceed as discussed. Brandon watched me make the call, his eyes widening as he understood what was happening. When I hung up, he whispered, "Did you turn everything over to the FBI?" "I didn't turn anything over," I replied. "They asked for my cooperation in an investigation that was already underway. Apparently, it wasn't just your company that was being investigated for money laundering." The final truth hit Brandon like a hammer. His mother, the CEO, wasn't just protecting him. She was using the company as a front for much broader financial operations connected to questionable investors in tax havens. My firing wasn't just nepotism. It was a desperate move to eliminate the only employee with enough technical access to uncover the full scheme. "You don't understand," Brandon muttered, sweat beading on his forehead. "If she goes down, half the investors in town go with her. It'll destroy hundreds of jobs." I stood up, leaving enough money on the table to pay for the coffees. "You should have thought of that before firing me for missing a party." I walked toward the door, but stopped and turned around. "Brandon, there's a fundamental difference between us. You used your power to destroy innocent people. I used my knowledge to protect them." I opened the door, feeling the cool afternoon air. "And as for your job, well, I hope you learned something about real work." When I left the cafe, 3 FBI cars were already parked in front of the company building. Through the glass windows, I could see agents leading executives away for questioning. Brandon ran after me, shouting something about deals and clemency, but I didn't turn around. There was nothing left to discuss. That night, I watched the news showing Brandon being led away in handcuffs. The anchor explained how a network of corporate corruption had been exposed by a brave whistleblower who was persecuted for his integrity. They didn't mention my name, but they didn't need to. Everyone in the industry knew who had brought down the Whitmore empire. My phone vibrated with a message from Jonas. "Congratulations. Justice served with surgical precision." I replied, "Thanks for planting the seeds. Without even knowing it, you gave me the tools to defend myself." His response was immediate. "True talent always finds a way, Nate. You just needed the opportunity to show your claws." The next morning, the Wall Street Journal headline summed it all up. $15 billion empire crumbles after executive fires creator of system he didn't control. The irony was poetic. Brandon had fired me thinking he controlled my work, only to discover he had handed over $1 billion in intellectual property to the competition. But while Brandon faced federal charges and his mother negotiated plea deals, I was building something much bigger than revenge. I was building a future where competence mattered more than connections, where innovation beat privilege, where hard work was rewarded instead of exploited. The boy who thought he could humiliate me by not going to his party discovered he had started a war against someone who knew exactly how to win. And when the last lawsuit was settled, when the last headline was published, one thing would be crystal clear: never underestimate someone who built the system you think you control. 6 months later, Brandon Whitmore was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for money laundering, corporate fraud, and tax evasion. The photo of him being led away in handcuffs to the federal penitentiary in Atlanta was on the front page of every business newspaper in the country. His mother, the former CEO, negotiated a plea bargain that reduced his sentence to 8 years, but not his public humiliation. The company that was once worth $15 billion was liquidated in a court auction. The assets were sold to cover compensation to aggrieved investors and reimbursements to wrongfully terminated employees. Sarah, the support technician Brandon fired at the height of his paranoia, received a $2 million severance package and now heads the corporate ethics department at Helix Dynamics. As for me, sitting in my office on the 40th floor of the Helix Tower, overlooking the same city where I was humiliated, I reflect on the extraordinary journey of the past 2 years. The algorithm they thought they controlled now protects networks in 53 countries. My position as Director of Global Innovation allows me not only to develop revolutionary technology, but also to establish ethical protocols that prevent the kind of corruption that nearly destroyed me. Marcus still works with me, now as Vice President of Systems. Rachel Kim accepted the position of Chief Auditor, ensuring that our company never replicates the mistakes of the previous one. Jonas Chun came out of retirement to become our strategic advisor, applying his experience to protect other talented individuals from toxic environments. The most important call came last week. It was my mother, her voice beaming with joy. "Nate, honey, the doctor said I'm completely cured. The new treatment your insurance covered worked perfectly." Her health had been my biggest concern throughout this whole ordeal. Now, not only did she have the best healthcare available, but she also had the peace of mind of knowing she would never have to worry about medical bills again. Yesterday, we received final confirmation. Our contract with the U.S. government to modernize the national security infrastructure was approved. $1.2 billion over 5 years. The same amount that Brandon and his mother destroyed through their greed and incompetence, now invested in protecting the entire country. The irony did not go unnoticed. Brandon fired me because I wasn't a team player. Today, I lead a team of 250 of the best technology professionals in the world. He questioned my cultural fit. Now, our corporate culture is studied in universities as a model of meritocracy and responsible innovation. But the most profound transformation was not professional or financial. It was personal. I learned that real power doesn't come from titles or family connections. It comes from the ability to create genuine value, protect vulnerable people, and use knowledge to build a better world. Brandon used privilege to exploit and destroy. I used competence to protect and build. The last I heard, he was serving time in federal prison, participating in rehabilitation programs. I'm told he's learning basic programming. I sincerely hope he learns not just code, but humility. As for his mother, she is working as a financial advisor in a small town, rebuilding her life away from the spotlight. If you've made it this far in the story of how an unfair firing turned into the biggest corporate turnaround of the decade, be sure to subscribe to the channel for more stories of people who turned adversity into absolute triumph. Today, when young professionals come to me for advice on how to deal with toxic environments or incompetent bosses, I always say the same thing: your value is not determined by those who fail to recognize it. You are not disposable. You are not replaceable. And when the world tries to write you out of the story, that's your cue to pick up the pen and write the next chapter yourself. The boy who thought he could humiliate me by not going to his party discovered that he had awakened a sleeping giant. And when it was all over, one truth was crystal clear: competence always beats connections, merit always beats nepotism, and justice, even if late, always finds its way.